It started with a cryptic post on X, formerly Twitter. At exactly 6:45 a.m. Eastern Time, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney posted just 13 words. Just got off the phone with Donald Trump. That was something. More to say soon. It wasn't much. No punctuation bombshells, no direct accusations. But coming from a man known for his restraint, the tweet hit like a thunderclap. Within 15 minutes, hashtags like Jeer Trump Carney call, What did Trump say, and Canadian chaos were trending across Canada, and the northeastern U.S. reporters scrambled to confirm the call. Pundits speculated if Carney had just broken diplomatic protocol or issued a subtle warning. Inside Parliament Hill, senior advisers were caught off guard. There had been no media advisory, no internal briefing. Only a few aides had even known the call was scheduled. The fact that Carney, the same man who had once led both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England without a single headline-worthy gaffe, had tweeted something so vague, so emotionally charged, made the situation all the more surreal. CTV cut into regular programming. CBC launched a special segment titled The Carney Call. Even BBC World picked up the story, pairing the tweet with old footage of Carney shaking hands with international leaders, as if to contrast his past composure with the present storm. But it wasn't just the tweet, it was who the tweet was about. Donald J. Trump, the former U.S. president turned hyperactive political disruptor, wasn't just a figure of fascination in the States. In Canada, he was a walking headache. He had insulted Canadian dairy policies, called Justin Trudeau dishonest and weak, and once allegedly tried to renegotiate the Canada-US border to improve real estate flow. Now he was back. Not in office, but very much in the mix. According to two aides later interviewed anonymously, the phone call had lasted exactly 17 minutes and 42 seconds. That fact alone became a symbol, a moment immortalized in Canadian political history. Carney had answered the call from his private office just after 6:20 a.m. The expectation was a brief check-in. Trump had reached out through back channels, claiming he wanted to congratulate Carney on his historic win. The staff assumed it was performative, but harmless. It wasn't. Within the first 3 minutes, Trump veered off script. "Mark," he said, "I'm gonna run again. You know it. The world knows it. Biden's done. It's my show in 2028. So what I need from you, and this would be huge, is a little nod. A little Trump's the guy type message. Canada respects me. You respect me, right?" Carney, taken aback, tried to redirect. He offered formal pleasantries. He mentioned trade efficiency, cross-border environmental cooperation, even joint innovation on EV production. Trump wasn't having it. "Marky, I like EVs. I like horses more, but whatever. That's not the point. Point is, you, a big-time banker, smart guy, central bank stuff. If you say I'm smart on the economy, that's a lock. I win Ohio and Ontario. Think about it." Carney paused. He looked at his team. They shook their heads. What had begun as a symbolic gesture had turned into a borderline extortion attempt, or, at the very least, a wildly inappropriate favor request from a former president to a sitting world leader. "Mr. Trump," Carney said with unshaken composure, "with all due respect, I don't take foreign policy direction from private citizens, even famous ones." That line ended the conversation, but it was just the beginning of the storm. Unbeknownst to Carney, Trump's team had recorded the call, and someone, whether out of spite, strategy, or sheer chaos, was about to leak it. Less than 48 hours after Prime Minister Carney's cryptic tweet, something unexpected happened. A scratchy, low-quality audio clip surfaced online, first appearing on a fringe political forum, then making its way into a Telegram channel known for right-wing conspiracy content. The clip was titled, "Trump Dominates Canada's PM. Leaked Call Exposes Globalist Agenda." At first, most people assumed it was fake. The quality was poor, and it sounded more like a sketch comedy routine than a serious conversation. Trump's unmistakable voice cut through with exaggerated bravado. Carney's tone was subdued, polite, occasionally perplexed. The conversation was jarring in its absurdity, and people couldn't look away. Voice analysts, including one from Oxford University, were quickly called in to evaluate the clip. Within hours, multiple experts confirmed the voices were authentic. The leak was real. The media exploded. Within minutes, clips of the recording were being played on CBC, Global News, MSNBC, and even Fox News. Editorial panels popped up on every channel, arguing about the ethical implications of the leak, the legality of the recording, and the optics for Canada's newly elected Prime Minister. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, chaos was unfolding behind the scenes. Carney's office was blindsided. No one had anticipated the call would be recorded, let alone leaked. The Prime Minister's office was immediately placed on high alert. Advisors rushed to assemble a response team, legal counsel was summoned, and diplomatic liaisons scrambled to contact their counterparts in Washington for damage control. The problem? Trump wasn't part of the U.S. government anymore. He wasn't beholden to formal channels, and he had zero interest in diplomacy. In fact, by the time Carney's staff finished crafting their initial statement, Trump had already hijacked the narrative. From his gold-plated compound in Florida, Trump held a live press event just hours after the leak went viral. Surrounded by loyal donors, MAGA influencers, and cardboard cutouts of himself shaking hands with various world leaders, Trump grinned at the cameras and addressed the situation head-on. "I talked to Carney. He was nervous, very nervous. Good banker, sure, maybe. But not tough. I like tough. Canada deserves better. They love me. I fixed NAFTA, remember that? Trudeau cried in a snowbank after I was done with him." Then, in true Trump fashion, he reached under the podium and pulled out a hockey stick adorned with a red Trump 2028 decal. He swung it like a bat and knocked a can of maple syrup off the table behind him. The crowd laughed. The clip, once again, went viral. In Ottawa, the mood was anything but amused. Carney convened a crisis team. Diplomats were already reporting quiet unease from allies, particularly in Europe and Asia, who viewed the incident as a sign of volatility. Though Trump held no office, his influence was undeniable. His ability to create chaos transcended borders. A new problem was emerging, too: polling data. Carney's approval ratings, which had been hovering comfortably in the high 50s, were beginning to dip. Not dramatically, yet, but enough to raise alarms. Focus groups revealed a growing concern not about the call itself, but about Carney's response to it. "He seemed too rattled," one voter said. "I want a leader who can shut that kind of stuff down fast," said another. Backbench MPs were beginning to murmur. Conservative rivals in Parliament seized the opportunity, accusing Carney of being unprepared for global pressure and too soft to deal with bullies. And then came the headlines. Trump runs PR circles around Canada's PM. The National Post. Carney's quiet panic, McLean's Moose versus Mammoth, Trump overshadows Carney, Politico, and perhaps the most damning of all, a meme circulating online that simply read, Carney took the call, Trump took the narrative. Behind the scenes, Canadian intelligence officials were beginning to suspect the leak wasn't just a PR stunt. It might have been part of a coordinated disinformation push. But even they hadn't anticipated what would come next. By the start of the following week, Ottawa was no longer focused on climate, policy, or even parliament. It was focused on damage control. The phone call, now a full-blown political saga, had overtaken every news cycle in Canada and seeped into the US, UK, and even Australian media. What should have been a footnote in a hectic political landscape had mutated into an existential leadership test for Prime Minister Mark Carney. His tweet had been strange, the leaked audio damning, but it was the media frenzy that did the most damage. On Power and Politics, an emergency panel of political scientists debated whether Carney had committed the gravest self-inflicted wound in Canadian diplomacy since the 1970s. On TikTok, creators reenacted the call using sock puppets. A viral video titled Carney vs. Trump, The Roast of the North, racked up 11 million views in 24 hours. Even Carney's allies were privately concerned. In a tense meeting inside the Prime Minister's office, his press secretary laid out the new reality. We are no longer managing a news story, we're managing a meme. The PM looked exhausted. Mark Carney, a man who once soothed global markets during the 2008 financial crisis, was being digitally dismantled by a former reality TV host and his rabid online following. Carney attempted to take the high road. He scheduled a national address from Parliament, framed as a reaffirmation of Canada's commitment to civility and international cooperation. He spoke of the importance of discretion, diplomacy, and leadership by example. Canada does not govern through tweets or theatrics, he declared, staring down the lens of a national broadcast. It was a solid speech, measured, thoughtful, presidential in tone. But within 30 minutes, Trump responded. On Truth Social, he wrote, Carney just gave the weakest speech in Canadian history. No fire, no fun, no clue. When I talk, people listen. When he talks, people nap. Sad. And that was that. Once again, Trump had flattened a nuanced message into a viral insult. And unfortunately for Carney, it worked. Again. The polls reflected the mood. Within 48 hours of his national address, Carney's approval rating dropped another 5 points. Focus groups showed Canadians didn't necessarily agree with Trump, but they didn't feel like Carney was winning either. One suburban voter in Mississauga summed it up on a live call-in show. I like Carney, I really do. But if Trump can throw him off this badly from one phone call, how's he going to handle actual pressure? It was a sentiment that echoed across the political spectrum. Carney's image as a calm, technocratic problem solver had become a liability. In a political world that now favored strong images over substance, composure could look like passivity. The opposition took note. Conservative MP Madison Clark, young, ambitious, and media-savvy, had emerged as Carney's sharpest critic. She delivered a fiery speech in the House of Commons. We elected a leader, not a librarian. If he can't even hold his ground with an ex-president sitting on a Florida golf course, how can he represent Canada on the world stage? The line was clipped, shared, and broadcast across major networks. Clark's speech was soon dubbed the turning point by the Globe and Mail. Meanwhile, Trump doubled down. His campaign released a cartoon ad, animated in exaggerated style, showing Trump riding a moose across the Canadian border while Carney tried to block him with spreadsheets. The ad was juvenile, offensive, ridiculous. It was also downloaded and shared millions of times. Carney's team tried everything: interviews with trusted journalists, op-eds in the Toronto Star, controlled press releases explaining that the government remained focused on real issues. But none of it could compete with the Trump media machine. At one point, a senior Carney advisor floated the idea of hiring a counter-influencer team, online defenders who could fight memes with memes. Carney refused. "I'm not waging politics through punchlines," he said. "Then they'll write your epitaph with one," his advisor replied quietly. It was a harsh truth, and Carney knew it. And just when things couldn't get any more surreal, a second, even more damaging Trump recording was about to drop. By now, the chaos had jumped the 49th parallel and burrowed deep into the American political bloodstream. The saga was no longer a Canadian embarrassment. It had become an international spectacle. In Washington, Canadian diplomats were fielding calls from senators, reporters, and allies trying to make sense of what exactly had happened. Normally reserved for quiet conversations about timber quotas and joint military training exercises, the Canadian embassy found itself at the center of a diplomatic storm, and not one it had caused. This wasn't an official scandal, not quite, but it felt like one. Senator Clay Hastings, a Trump-aligned Republican from Texas with a flair for the theatrical, seized the moment. Standing in front of a Canadian flag during a hastily organized press conference, he leaned into the microphone with a smirk and said, "Maybe next time Canada wants to run its mouth, they'll remember who keeps their pipelines profitable. Just saying." The remark was inflammatory, and it worked exactly as intended. Headlines erupted across Canada. Some in Alberta cheered, others in Vancouver fumed. American social media lit up with chants of # Maple Week and # Carney collapse. Meanwhile, Mark Carney's internal situation was deteriorating. His chief of staff, long considered one of the calmest in Canadian politics, reportedly lost her temper in a closed-door briefing. "This is a circus," she said, "and we're stuck performing as the sad clown." The truth was, the PM's team had lost the ability to steer the narrative. Every strategic comms plan was overwhelmed by Trump's relentless outbursts, impulsive media stunts, and endless fire hose of content. One aide even noted, "We're using press releases. He's using memes. We're bringing knives to a meme war." Polling across Canada reflected the damage. Younger voters, Carney's strongest base, were losing confidence. It wasn't that they supported Trump. They didn't. But they had grown addicted to spectacle, and Carney was losing that game. Then came the second leak. 12 seconds. Just 12 seconds of new audio. Scratchy, clipped, but unmistakably real. It wasn't part of the original recording. It was something else, captured from the tail end of the call, leaked not by Carney's office, but once again from inside Trump's team. Trump's voice, unfiltered and casual. "Look, Mark, I know you're not a tough guy, but say the word, and maybe I don't bring up what we discussed in London." That line set Canadian politics on fire. The media descended into pure speculation. What had they discussed in London? Had Carney met with Trump in private during an international summit? Was it about policy? Finance? Was there a personal angle? None of it was confirmed. Carney's office denied any wrongdoing and insisted there was no secret agreement, no personal matter, no backdoor negotiation. But the damage was already done. Rumors metastasized online. Reddit threads accused Carney of selling Canadian tech patents to U.S. firms. Facebook groups circulated a fake story claiming Carney had offered Trump access to Canadian oil reserves in exchange for an endorsement. Even legitimate news outlets took the bait. What did Trump mean about London? CBC News? Is there a second call? Toronto Sun? Carney's secrets? Inside the British ties that won't go away. The Times, UK. Inside Parliament, opposition MPs pounced. Madison Clark, now enjoying a meteoric rise in popularity, took to the floor and declared, "The Prime Minister owes Canadians the truth. What was said in London? What is he hiding?" Her speech was clipped and sent across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook in less than an hour. American media replayed it on loop, gleefully showcasing how even Carney's own country was turning on him. Back inside the PMO, Carney sat in silence after hearing the tape. "He's weaponizing mystery," he finally muttered. "And perception," his advisor replied. "You can't fact-check a whisper." And then came the whispers in Parliament. A motion was being drafted. Not quite a vote of no confidence, yet, but something close. A formal censure. Mark Carney, once hailed as Canada's most stable voice in decades, was now at the edge of a political cliff. And Trump hadn't even left Florida. The motion hit the floor at 8:15 a.m. on a foggy Thursday. It wasn't a no-confidence vote, yet, but it sent a chilling message. Titled, "Motion for Review of Diplomatic Conduct Pertaining to Unauthorized Communications," it was introduced by Madison Clark, with the backing of the conservative bloc and an uneasy alliance of centrist independents. On paper, it was a request for transparency. In reality, it was a politically loaded cannonball. Carney stood in the House of Commons as the motion was read aloud, stone-faced, arms crossed. Reporters in the gallery furiously typed, even before the speaker finished the last sentence. Social media declared it the soft coup of Ottawa. What hurt most? It wasn't just his opponents who had questions. Several MPs from Carney's own Liberal coalition abstained from defending him. Some even hinted they would support the motion if it meant ending the growing circus of perception. Across Canada, the public was split. Many still respected Carney. They knew he hadn't done anything illegal. But even his supporters began to admit he hadn't done enough to seize back control. Meanwhile, in Florida, Trump was hosting what he called a diplomacy dinner. The guest list included GOP senators, far-right influencers, and several political hopefuls from international fringe parties. The event was broadcast live on Truth Social and Rumble. At one point during the night, Trump stood up, raised a glass, and said, "To Prime Minister Carney, may he find a nice quiet job at the Bank of Canada after this is all over." The room roared with laughter. Then, in a moment as brazen as it was calculated, Trump handed a manila envelope to his campaign manager on camera and whispered, "Drop the third tape when the vote starts." The crowd gasped. So did the internet. The phrase "third tape" trended globally within minutes. In Ottawa, Carney's legal team went into emergency lockdown. Government servers were scanned. Diplomatic security reviewed every Carney-related travel log. No one could find any record of a third call, third recording, or even a third leak. But that didn't matter. The threat of a third tape was enough to shift the news cycle again. The motion hadn't even been voted on yet, and already the media was speculating about what could be on a recording that might not even exist. 3 days later, Carney made the hardest decision of his political life. Standing in front of the nation during a somber Sunday morning broadcast, he addressed Canada directly from the steps of Parliament. His voice was calm, unwavering, tired. My job is not to play chess with chaos agents. It's to lead, with clarity, with dignity, and with accountability. I will not allow this office to become a battlefield of rumors. Therefore, effective immediately, I am stepping aside. The nation froze. Some applauded his grace. Others called it a capitulation. But no one denied the weight of what had happened. The first Canadian Prime Minister in over a century had resigned, not because of scandal or corruption, but because he had been digitally outmaneuvered by a man not even in government. As Carney walked off the podium, he ignored the dozens of shouted questions. Instead, he smiled politely, nodded once to the cameras, and disappeared behind the doors of Parliament. Later that day, Trump posted one word on Truth Social: checkmate. The post received over 1 million likes and was retweeted by foreign politicians, conspiracy theorists, and even some Canadian influencers who had once supported Carney. Political scientists would go on to write books about what happened that month. Lectures would be given, dissertations written. The Trump effect had not just claimed another political victim, it had crossed international borders and demonstrated something terrifying. You didn't need to be in power to wield it. You just needed a phone call and a following. Mark Carney would go on to write a book, return to financial consulting, and live mostly out of the spotlight. Madison Clark would become the new leader of the Conservative Party. And Trump, well, Trump continued his campaign, emboldened by the chaos he had unleashed. And Canada, usually known for calm politics and soft diplomacy, had just been hit by a hurricane with no warning and no precedent.